Good afternoon, everybody. I hope you all had a nice lunch. And thank you very much for the speakers this morning. Didn't we have some interesting things? It never ceases to amaze me, the breadth of knowledge that we have in this group. They were fascinating talks. And thank you very much for Stephen and Jeremy as well for organising today. As you know, I live and work in Lincolnshire. Probably been there for far too long. But I'm ideally placed to look at vernacular furniture when it turns up there. And I've been doing that for quite a few years now, particularly with the rush-seated chairs, trying to get that sorted out. The really difficult thing about that is not one single rush-seated chair has ever been found with a maker's name on it. So how difficult is that? And it's because I'm there and occasionally I can find a chair with a long provenance that I can start to hone down the town or the area where that pattern comes from, as opposed to another part of Lincolnshire. And I'm gradually sorting that out, different parts of Lincolnshire, different chairs. I'm not going to be talking about that at all today. I'm going to be talking about the tradition of making Windsor chairs in Lincolnshire. And as Stephen mentioned, I'm sure you probably all looked at the journal. I'm sure you all flicked through it and looked at the pictures. I hope some of you read the text. But this chap, Joseph Newton, I didn't know about him until Robert Williams one evening kindly mentioned that he'd come across him. And when I open my bedroom curtains in the morning, I look across the fields and I can see the spire of Fenton Church. It is the next village to me. And there, Joseph Newton used to make Windsor chairs, and we know that because he advertised them in 1725. And he is the earliest known maker of Windsor chairs in the world. It's quite a feat for Lincolnshire, isn't it? So I'm not going to be talking about him at all. I'm going to be talking about... No, you've read it. I'm going to be talking about the tradition which is written about in the published literature on Windsor chairs, and it's more to the south of Lincolnshire. You know, it's Boston, it's Stanford, it's Grantham, it's Bourne, and places like that to the south of Lincolnshire. The one thing I do as well, I have done over the last few years, I've given quite a few talks to local groups, history groups, civil society groups, museum groups. And you know, I thoroughly enjoy doing that because what I have to tell people absolutely amazes them. And it amazes them for two reasons. The first reason is they cannot believe that somebody can stand up for an hour and talk about chairs. That's the first thing. But the second thing is they are absolutely amazed that this huge tradition went on in Lincolnshire all that time ago and not that much research has been done into it. And I always get the same questions at the end of every talk, particularly when it comes to the Windsor chairs. People ask me, when did it start? Who started it? Whereabouts did they get the wood from? Whereabouts did they sell the chairs into? And I remember when I first started doing this research about, maybe 10 years ago, maybe more, that those were exactly the same questions I used to ask. I mean, I had a chat with Robert and John Boreham about these things as well, but they hadn't done the research into that, and you wouldn't expect them to either. And I never met Christopher Gilbert. I'd love to have met Christopher Gilbert. We've had so much to talk about. But I often used to chat to Bill and Jerry as well about this, and Bill had never gone that far back to sort out how it started. Because when you think about it, there must have been one day when the Windsor chair tradition started in South Lincolnshire. And I don't think Joseph Newton had anything to do with that. There's a void there of about 60 or 70 years. And I'm not saying that nothing went on then. We are doing research into that period, but it's not immediately obvious at the minute. What happened after that, when this explosion of Windsor chair making, there was a day there when no chairs had been made, and after that it just exploded. And I remember sitting in the office quite a few years ago and thinking to myself, wouldn't it be fantastic to work out what actually happened all those years ago? And I think you all know the name of the makers because they're all in the books. I mean, there's a chap called Amos, his chairs turn up, Hubbard, Wilson, the Taylors, Marsh from Sleaford, there's Simpson from Boston, there were 3 of them in fact. There's a few others. I've discovered other chair makers which nobody has recorded before, and other models as well. And I thought to myself, if I slowly, systematically went through every one of those chair makers, looked at their families, looked at their parents, find out where they were born, and see if I could put that genealogical map together to find out who might have been the first one to start the tradition. I know it was a dauntless task. I knew if I did it for long enough, I'd be able to do it. But I had to start, and I did the easy ones first. And I looked at them, and I picked away at them, and I went back to different ones. The Taylors were particularly difficult, because Taylor is a common name in South Lincolnshire, and it was so difficult trying to sort the families out. And I did a bit at them, put them to one side. I sorted out Hubbard, that wasn't too difficult. Marsh was fairly straightforward as well. William Shirley, father and son. Thomas Simpson at Boston, I sorted all that out, got the dates sorted out there, went back to Taylors, still couldn't make any sense of them, went back to other makers as well, and then eventually had another go at the Taylors. And I had a hunch that in fact the people who started it were in fact the Taylors. They seemed like to me to be the first people who could have started the tradition. But I couldn't prove it. If you look in the written literature, 2 Taylors are mentioned in particular early on. There's John and William. And I soon found out that they were brothers. They were born in Grantham. And I guessed that their father might have been the chap who started this off. But it's no good me coming here and saying, oh, I've got a hunch. I had to find out. And that's what research into vernacular furniture is all about. Chasing down a hunch. You might be wrong, but it doesn't matter. You can eliminate that. There's nothing wrong with going after hunches. And I clearly remember almost coming to a dead end because I'd done all the birth, deaths and marriages, I'd done all the directories and other things as well, and I was running out of options to find out what people did. And then I remembered I discovered the British Newspaper Archives, and they have been just an absolutely fantastic, rich vein of information. And they've given me, and it's still today, I still find things in there which I haven't found before. And if nobody's ever used that before, it is absolutely brilliant. And we are so lucky in Lincolnshire because the Stanford Mercury, what day did it start? 1711?
Yes, just about.
I think so. And so they've got all that history, and it is a primary source as well. You cannot fault it. It is absolutely brilliant. And I'm sure we've all done this when we're doing our research on a cold winter's night with the rain hammering down against the window. Everybody in the house has gone to bed. All the lights are off. You're in the office with the screen and just this pool of light. And then something, yeah, you've done it. And then something comes on the screen and you just feel the hairs on the back of your neck stand up. And you read it and you reread it and you just consider the implications. You quickly take a picture of it in case the electricity goes off. It is just fantastic. And I've had several of those moments when I've been searching for Windsor chair makers. If you just want to show this first slide, this is the one. Look, I still get a frick onto of excitement when I see this. Just have a look at that. I'll just let you read that for a minute. This is an advert for Windsor chair makers who are wanted immediately. A journeyman Windsor chair maker who has good hands may have constant employ and wages according to merit by applying to Mr. Roger Taylor, Windsor chair maker of Grantham, right bang in the middle of 1800. That is the father of John and William. I knew he was. That is the only reference I have got of him being a Windsor chair maker. I knew a lot about him. I'd come across him before. Every time I found him, he was called a victualler. Never a Windsor chair maker. He was always called a victualler, which means to me he probably ran a hostelry, sold liquor, or an inn, or something like that. That was his job. I cannot find out where he was born. There's several candidates. Other people have tried in Grantham, and we cannot find out exactly where he was born, and I cannot find out exactly what he did as a young man. What I do know was that he got married in St Wolfram's to Sophia Smith in 1782. Right at the beginning of the year, by the end of the year, they had their first child, which is John. So he was born at the end of 1782. And a while later, William followed, and a while after that, there was James, and then there was quite a gap, and then they had little Charlotte as well. So a family of 4 children. And the next time I came across Roger Taylor, there's a document in the archives at Lincoln, and it's the following year. This is 1800. I came across a document in 1801, and it's there in the archives if you want to go and have a look at it. And it is signed in a peculiar way with a cross, because his signature is lovely. I've seen it several times. That document was his will, and it was signed and dated September 1801, and he was 38 years old. Yes, he was 38 years old at that time, and there's only one reason why somebody draws a will up at that age. He knew he wasn't going to survive. And the poor fella, in October 1781, he was buried in St Wolfram's. And if you go in the east door in St Wolfram's, turn left, out the north door, there's his headstone lying on the ground, Roger Taylor. That's where he's buried. And I've stood beside him several times. I've been that close to him. But we're separated by 200 years. It must have been a sad occasion. Sophia would have been there. She had 3 teenage boys. And I think Charlotte was about 7 at the time. Roger was a well-respected man in Grantham. He was well known. There had been a big turnout. And even this chap who he was employed as a Windsor chairmaker at his workshop, he would have been there as well, whoever that was. I've no idea of his name. The one thing which is really interesting about the will is it's quite a concise document, which it would be. He leaves everything to his wife Sophia. It's a legal document, it's signed, it's sealed, he spells out how he wants things to be left. But there's one part sentence in his will which is fascinating, and I don't think it has any legal reference or is legally binding, but he chose to put it in. And if I just read it to you, this is part of a sentence about how he wants his daughter Charlotte to be looked after. And it says this: "Nevertheless, and in full and perfect confidence that she, my said wife Sophia, do and shall from out of my said effects, and from the profit of the business in which I am concerned, and which I desire may be carried on by her, maintain, educate, clothe, and bring up daughter Charlotte." Now, I would have thought putting a desire like that into a will has got no legal standing whatsoever. But he chose to put it in. And he must have discussed it with Sophia, because he must have known he was dying a long time before. You can only guess what the disease was. But they must have discussed what they were going to do with the businesses. And she probably agreed that she would try and carry on the businesses after he was gone. So that was put into the will. And that was the end of Roger Taylor. And that could have been the end of Windsor chairmaking in Grantham. And that could have been the end of my talk. But for that one line. And so how do we know what Sophia did after that? Whereabouts would we look to find out whether Sophia carried on the business? And the answer is Stamford Mercury, in the newspaper. And can we have the next slide? Just look at this. This is, by the way, just look at that. I'll let you read that for a minute, and I'll read it out as well. This is absolute gold dust, this is. Look at the date, 1802. It's June. So it's the following year. It's about, 9 months after Roger was buried. And we've got an address, the Mail Coach Inn in Grantham. S. Taylor, who was widow of Roger Taylor, who was a Windsor and fancy chair manufacturer, begs leave to return her sincere thanks to her friends and the public in general for the liberal support her late husband experienced in the above business, humbly informs them that she still carries on the same, and hopes she may rely on the continuance of their favours, but also wanted immediately 2 journeymen in the above branches, also a turner. And they use that expression again about a good hand may have constant employ. Isn't that fantastic? So she's telling the world her husband's gone, but the business is expanding. She's looking there to employ 5 more people. The workshop might have had 1, or it might have had more already, but she wanted more. And on top of that, we've got an address, the Mail Coach Inn. How good is that? Bound to be in Grantham High Street, isn't it? We can't find it. I and I've several other people in Grantham, we have searched and searched. We cannot pin down where the Mail Coach Inn is or was. We can get quite close to other ones, but it seems like every time they changed hands, they changed the name of the pub. And there's no trace of this. It could be that it was a sort of a medieval building and it got demolished after this. I mean, that might be one thing, but there's no reference to it. We can't find anything about it. But it implies that Roger Taylor and Sophia were either tenants or proprietors of the Mail Coach Inn. The third thing is, it could have been a mail drop, but they do use that address several times, so it just makes me wonder, that was the titular business was run from the Mail Coach Inn. It must have been a busy place as well, with all the people coming and going from there. And this thing about Sophia expanding the bit, just tell me this. When people employ journeymen and apprentices, only masters can do it. And the masters have had to go through a rigorous apprenticeship themselves. After Sophia had got the children ready for school, she wasn't going to pick up a handful of chisels and go down the workshop and start turning out components. There's a good chance that she had never set foot in the workshop in her life, particularly if she's involved with the inn. So how can she start employing people in the business? She's not a master. Do you understand how this used to work? The workshops? Well, I didn't when I saw that, and I was absolutely mystified by it. But one thing I will tell you, if you go back in Elizabethan law and the statutes on these things, it is absolutely fascinating reading. And this is from 1593, so it's the end of the Elizabeth I era. And this is something referring to the statute on masters, journeymen, servants and apprentices. And it says this: and so were in an action brought under this statute, it appeared that the defendant had for 7 years and upwards been employed by his father in the trade, but had never been bound apprentice, he was judged sufficiently qualified under the statute. That's called patrimony. Most of the eldest sons did that. It meant they didn't have to pay tax. But what it says after that is fascinating. And therefore also a wife who has lived with her husband in the business for a term of 7 years may continue to carry on the trade after his death. And likewise a second husband of such a woman, having been married to her for 7 years, may go on with the trade after her decease. The wardens in the borough of Grantham would have known that, because everybody would have known it throughout the country. Roger would have known that, and Sophia would have known that. She had every legal right to carry on the business. And she could have employed apprentices as long as there were trained journeymen in the workshop as well. And that's what happened. And The next advert to appear, we can go on to the next one if you would do, please. Look at this. This is, after the last advert, this is January 1803. So it's 6 or 7 months after the last one. This is Sophia Taylor again. Advertising to turners, spinning wheel makers, Windsor and fancy chair makers who are wanted immediately. 2 journeymen in each of the above branches. Good workmen may have constant employ. And so it goes on. At the Mail Coach Inn in Grantham again. So if every one of those posts were filled, it's true in every one of those, I think it's something like, she could have a workshop with 14 people in there. You just imagine the output of a workshop like that. That's assuming every one of those posts got filled. It must have been fantastic. And you imagine the number of chairs that they could have made as well. There's one thing I haven't mentioned, and I need to go back and talk about it now. It's the sons. And the eldest son was called John, which I've mentioned already. And if you look in the published work, John is mentioned, and he's mentioned as making chairs for 35 years. The first 2 entries you'll see, the first one says that he was apprenticed to his father, and then he was made freeman of the borough in 1807. I and others have searched for that information, and we cannot find it anywhere. But what I can tell you is that that son John got sent away from Grantham after that very first advert was published, but before Roger died. At the end of 1800, John went to Boston, and he went to work for a master there called Quincy Mattison. And I think Quincy Mattison might have been related to the family. And I know that because it says so in the apprentice records, because the duty was paid and there's a note made of it. And it says he went to Boston for 2 years and 9 months. So it implies, and you can work it out from his age, that he actually started his apprenticeship somewhere else, but finished it in Boston. And it seems completely logical, it started with his father. I actually didn't realise the significance of that until I was just putting this talk together. We always wondered what Roger was doing, where he learnt his trade. If his eldest son went to finish his trade in Boston with Quincy Mattison, who was a cabinet maker, it meant that the first part of his trade was in a wood-related industry. He couldn't have started with a tailor or a bricklayer, then finished off with a cabinet maker. He had to have started with another cabinet maker, or perhaps a carpenter or a joiner, which gives us an indication of what Roger did as a young man and what he was qualified in. That's the only indication I've got, and it makes perfect sense. He started with his father. When he got to 14, didn't pay the tax on it because by patrimony he could do that. But after that advert was placed, Roger realised he wasn't going to survive. And if he died, and then his son would have to go somewhere else, rather than do it in that order, he sent his eldest son away to Boston to finish his apprenticeship. So that's where he went. And if you work those dates out, he would have been finished and been given his freedom in the summer of 1803. And this you see here is at the beginning of 1803, which implies that Sophia was running the workshop, but she was in charge anyway, because her eldest son John still had 6 months to go in Boston. It wouldn't surprise me at all at this stage if Sophia had spoken to the warden. She might not even have spoken to him. She might have just said, 6 months to go, just bring him home. I need him here to help me run the business. That could have well happened. I don't know whether it did, but I'm sure there's every possibility that that could have happened. So she might not have been at home by herself. Her eldest son, when this advert went in, he might have come back from Boston and also been a freeman as well.
Right, moving on. There's several things happen now over the next few years, and I just want to go through them quite quickly. The first one, I think the tailors were making chairs in these first few years in Boston by themselves. I don't think they had any competition. I cannot find any reference to anybody else making Windsor chairs. The next one that I can find, in fact, is 1807, which is, no, come on to the next one, thank you, just go back, thank you, which was 4 years after this. No, back one more, sorry, there we go. 5 years after this, 1807, yes, there's a chap called Richard Hubbard. He advertised for 3 Windsor chair makers. Richard Hubbard lived in a fine house on the edge of Grantham. It's a 3-storey Georgian house. He might even have had it built new himself. I've been in the house as well. And so there must have been a huge potential to make Windsor chairs in Grantham at this time if he was looking for 3 men to come and join his business. The next thing that happened, if we have the next slide, this is John, sorry, I've just gone slightly out of sync here. This is John Taylor, the eldest son. This is John, no, this is right. This is the second bit. 1807, there was Richard Hubbard. 1808, this is John, the elder one. Look at this. John is advertising for an apprentice. And if he was in the workshop, working with his mother, or running the business, why hasn't she put her own name? I think this is indication that John had started his own business, because he was saying that he was looking for an apprentice to join him, and at the expiration of his time, he would actually become a journeyman himself. So I think John has left the workshop. And if you want to go on to the next one, that's 1808. This is 1809. This is Sophia again. She actually puts the same advert in, almost identical, looking for an apprentice. That's why I think John has left. I think he's left. I think Sophia's working the workshop by herself. The next thing that happened is in 1809, John Amos advertises for 3 Windsor chair makers as well. John Amos started, he was 36 when he put that advert in as well, John Amos was. He had 2 fine Georgian houses in North Parade in Grantham. So they must have realised there was a lot of money to be made out of making Windsor chairs in Grantham. And he started his life as a wheelwright. He advertised on many occasions for people to join his business. He would have made carts, he would have made ploughs, he would have made wagons and all these sort of things, but he changed in 1809 to become a Windsor chairmaker. And the last thing that happens in September 1810, Sophia Taylor marries somebody called John Bettison. John Bettison was a cabinet maker in Grantham. And I think when it gets to 1810, I think Sophia gives up the business. And the reason I think she gives up the business is the next advert. The Stamford Mercury is just brilliant. Look at this. I haven't mentioned him. This is the youngest one, William Taylor. Now, the interesting thing about William Taylor, let's just read it first, and then I'll tell you what's interesting about it. William Taylor, Windsor chair and spinning wheel maker of number 11, William Manners New Buildings in Westgate in Grantham, respectfully informs the public that he has commenced business on his own account and begs leave to assure them that no exertion on his part shall be wanting to give general satisfaction, having been 9 years assistant to his mother, who has declined business in his favour. So she's been running her side of the business now and passing it on to him. The interesting thing about William is that he left the house before his elder brother did. He wasn't entitled to get his apprenticeship with patrimony. He actually left in 1799. Before that first advert, he actually went to start his apprenticeship with somebody called William Allison in Grantham, who again was a woodworker, but this time he was a joiner. He'd only been there 3 years and William Allison went bankrupt. And because he went bankrupt, he didn't have a master. And it says that he's been helping his mother for 9 years, and if you work it backwards, when Allison became bankrupt, William came back to help his mother. So he was there, and then it looks like now he set up his own business, John's got his own business, and Sophia has finished. And there's one more advert to show you, and this is so important. You might have seen this one before. It does appear in Cotton's book. William Taylor, the original Windsor chairmaker. What does he mean by that? We know he's not the original chairmaker. I think he means that his family are the original chairmakers. That's why I think Roger, his father, brought the tradition to Grantham. It returns thanks for the very liberal encouragement he has for several years experienced at Stowe Green Fair, and informs his friends and the public in general he will have an assortment of yew and other Windsor chairs at the above fair on the 2nd and 3rd of July, when orders will be thankfully received. Now this is the important piece. None are his but those marked Taylor's, Grantham, on the seat. And Taylor's has an S on the end, and that is so important. So what's happened by this date? Roger's died, Sophia's married and finished, John's got his own workshop, William's got his own workshop. Well, actually that's not entirely the case, and I'll demonstrate to you why now. And if you want to show the next slide, it's this. Because I know so precisely when these people started and finished their workshops, I'm able to put dates on the chairs if we can find them. The first one is Roger Taylor. That's his advert. That's his burial. The second one's Sophia. That's when she carries on the workshop. That's when she gets married. John Taylor, that's when the advert says he's looking for an apprentice. I think he started his own workshop. That's when he finished. And William Taylor, that's when he says he started his own workshop. And that's when he finished. That's actually wrong, the 7th of October. It should be the 6th of October, which was a Friday. And he would have finished about 6 o'clock. Friday night, he was going down the pub. So, I'm just going to have a drink actually, if I may do for a minute. You can just sit and digest those dates and see what you think to those. The significance of that is that if we can find chairs from those 3 workshops, we can date them so precisely. I don't think anybody in the recent, by the way, I've got notes by the way, I'll give everybody the sheet when I finish with all these dates on. I don't think anybody can date chairs anywhere that precisely, particularly these 2. So all we need to do now is to find chairs from those workshops. Simple. Has anybody got any Taylor chairs?
Not guilty.
Have you had one?
No, I haven't. I was a bit.
Right, so if we go on to the next slide, let's have a look. Who wants to see some chairs? Oh no, we haven't got chairs. Those dates, you must have been worried about where I got those dates from. And it's from here. This is copy out of the Post Office Mail Coach Guards Appointments List. I didn't find this, a chap called Chris Goodwin found this for me. This is absolutely brilliant. I'll just read the top line. John Taylor, Grantham, chairmaker, is sponsored by Lord Brownlow. What was he doing knowing Lord Brownlow? And it's got the date there. 1st of January 1811. And then it says his routes. I think it's Grantham and Boroughbridge, I think these routes were. And it goes, he stops there being a mail coach guard for 34 years. And this other one at the bottom, William Taylor, Grantham, chairmaker, Lord Brownlow again. There's the 7th of October of 1815, and that's where the lines he works from, and he works for 31 years. So that is how I know precisely when they finished making chairs. They could not have done any other way, because they were out of town. And Lord Brownlow, he could have well have been the proprietor of the mail coach inn, and tailors could have been tenants. They would have known all about mail coach guards. They all died wealthy. They got huge tips. It was lawless. Once you left Grantham, before you get to the next town, the only person who could carry a loaded weapon was the mail coach guard. And if you got there safely, they were rewarded handsomely for doing it. That's why they wanted to do it, rather than make chairs. Right. Let's see some pictures of some chairs. We've all come to that today. Look at that. It's not, the dimensions aren't right because the picture's been squashed. That is a signed tailor. I have come across a lot of signed tailors. They are not uncommon. I bet you in the next 12 months I can find half a dozen of these. They must have been made in vast numbers. I think these were made in the workshop of Roger and Sophia Taylor. So we can date them to the first 10 years of 1800. And this turns on its head completely everything that is written in the published literature about these early chairs. They always said they had crinoline stretchers and crooked underarm supports. No, they didn't. It is possible to find them, but the majority of them are like this. There is one overarching feature about these chairs. They are almost devoid of decoration. The only decoration on them is that front leg, that underarm support. Otherwise, there's nothing. And they are really built down to a price. There's 8 spindles at the back when you usually expect 9, and there's 3 short ones either side when you would expect 4. These are relatively light chairs. They've got straight edges to them as well. So much easier to make. And like all Lincolnshire chairs here, that is turned down to a pencil and let in. So easy to make. No decoration, don't bother about decorations on the back legs. These chairs were built down to a price. They were made in huge numbers and shipped out. I'm not sure if these were actually meant for residential properties. But I can't prove it. You must have noted the date and what was going on at that time was the Napoleonic War. And if these were made in tens of thousands, huge numbers. So how are we getting around in Grantham? They wouldn't use a cart, they'd have got shaken to bits. Because the roads were terrible around Grantham. Even the A1 wasn't very good. Would anybody like to guess when the Grantham Canal was opened? 1797. 3 years before Roger Taylor's first advert. That connected Grantham with the Trent at Nottingham. And that gave them a huge area to ship the chairs into. And I can't prove it. I've looked and looked and looked for some records. And you can find a lot of agricultural products go backwards and forwards up and down the canal. And it sometimes says goods as well, but it never specifically mentions chairs. You could get hundreds of chairs on a barge, and they would get there in perfect condition. They'd be covered with tarpaulin as well. They'd be absolutely fine. But that is the way I think they got them out of Grantham. But I can't prove it. But these chairs are not uncommon. And they never varied the pattern. They had one pattern that they used. You can find these occasionally with a backsplat. Take those 2 out the middle and put a backspat in. And I am aware of 1 or 2 which have got a curved underneath stretchers, but they're not common. That is a common pattern, and I see it all the time. And if you want to go on to the next slide, and if you look at the internet, you can find them as well. That's just one I found in one of the dealers' sites. That's so obviously a tailor. As soon as I glance at these, I can tell you the tailor's chairs. There is a possibility there could be another man's chair who I think took over the pattern when they're finished. And if you want to go on to the next one, look at these 2. I haven't handled these 2 chairs. These are so rare. This one's in Crispin's book. That was written about 1990. And I found this one, it passed through Neil's of Nottingham in 2002. And I know it's an awful image, but it just shows you how different John Taylor's chairs were to his parents. For a start, they've got flared edges to them. They've got 9 spindles at the back and they've got 4 short ones either side. They are heavier chairs. They are more elegant chairs. There's more to them. There's more components. They take more making. They were aiming for a different market. And I think that market was the market that both Amos and Hubbard were selling into. I think John Taylor tried as well. I would love to find a J. Taylor chair, but they are so rare. And they're so rare because he didn't make chairs for very long. And there's one more to look at, and that is William Taylor.
So
How was it?
it's stamped J on the seat, I don't know that.
Say again?
It's stamped J Taylor on the seat.
I haven't handled them both, but both of the records say, in the
Same.
notes underneath, it says J. Taylor, and it's
Yeah.
quite specific in that.
Yeah, no, we can brilliant to get our hands on.
And this is the last one. And look at this. These are stamped Taylors with an S on the end. And we have been told by that advert in 1813, if there's an S on the end, it was made by William Taylor's workshop. The one on the right is mine, and the one on the left it belongs to a local chap in Sleaford, and I know of 3 or 4 more which are stamped with an S on the end. These were William Taylor chairs. They're very similar to his brother, but again, they are lovely chairs, they're bigger, they're heavier, they're more expensive to make. They were selling into a different market. They also made side chairs. I'll just show you some side chairs. Nobody's found side chairs of these. These are tailored side chairs. They turn up all the time. They must have made huge numbers of these side chairs. They're the bowback ones. That's got a splat in it. And the coneback ones, which is the next one, there's the 2 coneback ones, again, Taylor of Grantham. And these, I think actually 1810 at the end, not 1811. So that is how you can date these chairs. And that's all I've got to say. That's how I think that Windsor chair making started in Grantham and in South Lincolnshire.